Coming up on this episode, it's hard to laugh when you're worrying that the person you're watching is going to get hurt. It was actually a bit terrifying to see Lucy at 75 bouncing around on this recliner in this scene. Welcome to a special nostalgia edition of I Did Not Know That. Please like and subscribe.
Please stop saying don't forget to like and subscribe.
Sure, but how are we going to get followers?
They say it's difficult for the greats to know when it's time to quit. Athletes like Johnny Unitas, Joe Namath, Muhammad Ali, and countless others were wrong when they thought they still had one more fight or one more season in them. That can happen with actors, too. While I'm too young to have been around when the original I Love Lucy was on television, like most Americans, I watched the reruns, and I clearly remember her follow-up shows after her breakup with Desi Arnaz. The Lucy Show in the 1960s, and then Here's Lucy in the 1970s. While I was never a huge fan, I always enjoyed those shows. But how many recall her third attempt in 1986? The show was called Life with Lucy. How did an icon of television end up on a show that didn't even last one season? ABC was desperate. Their shows were struggling and they needed help, especially on Friday and Saturday. Lucille Ball had always been a ratings winner, so they convinced Lucy to come back for one more TV series. After all, what could go wrong? A viewer commented that one of the few comedians to come back with a second self-titled second series was Bob Newhart. Lucy had been one of those too. In fact, she did it twice. But unfortunately, she pushed her luck a bit too far with her third attempt. In the premiere episode of Life with Lucy, it was obvious what the message was. Lucy might be really old, but she is hip and has more energy than everyone.
Firms up your thighs. Hop, 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 hop. Boy, oh, that's my kind of music.
Benny Goodman? Glenn Miller?
No, Top Jimmy and the Rhythm Pigs.
While I think people can admire that someone of 75 is still trying to do comedy, her comedy needed to evolve a bit. As I watched the first episode on YouTube, it often felt forced and uncomfortable at times. There's something awkward that happens when even a person who's just in their 30s is still trying to act and dress like a teenager. What was funny when she was young, naive, and a crazy housewife with Desi wasn't the same when she was in her 70s. I think the same can be applied to male comedians. Many thought Jerry Lewis was hilarious in his 20s and 30s when he played young and stupid goofballs, but that type of comedy just doesn't play well after a certain age. Add to the fact that comedy had pretty dramatically changed by the 1980s, and Lucy had a lot going against her. The show struggled to strike a balance between the fact that Lucy was now an older person while still wanting to incorporate the slapstick and physical comedic style that made her famous. The attempts to create that humor with physical gags clashed with the reality of her age, making the humor feel forced and uncomfortable at times. It's hard to laugh when you're worrying that the person you're watching is going to get hurt. It was actually a bit terrifying to see Lucy at 75 bouncing around on this recliner in this scene. I have to think that Aaron Spelling and those involved in the shooting of this scene had to be thinking, I hope we don't kill her. I found out later that Lucille Ball had the final say on just about everything in this show. Producer Aaron Spelling said he realized the mistake they'd made by trying the same physical gags she did in the 1950s and would try to place Lucy in more realistic situations for her age. Like I'd mentioned, television had changed a lot, and Life with Lucy struggled to adapt to these changes. Audience were more accustomed to modern sitcoms that featured a different type of comedy. One episode that I thought worked better than the others was when they brought in guest star John Ritter, who was big at the time and, like Lucy, not only knew how to do physical comedy, but he was only in his 30s.
Water! I get
While it opened to mediocre ratings, it soon dropped like a rock. By November, ABC canceled the series because of terrible ratings. Even more embarrassing is that they'd shot 13 episodes and only aired 8. The media critics were brutal, and they tore it apart. It was reported that all of this personally devastated Ball, and she pretty much disappeared from the public after the show went off the air. With all that said, after all I'd heard about it after the first few episodes, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I actually remember when this show first aired, but I was too busy in life at the time to watch more than a promo ad for it. I remember rooting for her, but doubting that she'd be able to pull it off. The show had some guest stars drop in, like Ruth Buzzy, Peter Graves, Audrey Meadows, and like I mentioned, John Ritter, who made the show more interesting at times. And Gail Gordon, who starred in the Lucy shows in the 60s and 70s, was a regular again on this one. Despite being 80 years old, he was still pretty good at playing the stuffy old curmudgeon role. And despite all of its flaws, if I was forced to watch this show or any modern comedy on TV these days, I'd watch this. Apart from the earlier problems mentioned, I think what really hurt this show a lot was that Lucy desperately needed a better cast to play off of. Aside from the always dependable Gail Gordon, the rest of the cast of supporting actors were bland, and it seemed like they were pulled from a community theater. In the past, she of course had Desi, William Frawley, Mary Jane Croft, her own children, and her favorite sidekick, Vivian Vance. But unfortunately, getting Vivian Vance back wasn't an option since she'd passed away a few years before this latest show. Another problem was I'd read that she was using the same comedy writers she'd used in her show from the 1950s, and some of the gags and the writing style were just simply outdated. Just like the athletes I'd mentioned, it's a sad way to end such a brilliant career. It was nice to see her pop up again at the Academy Awards just a few weeks before she suddenly passed away in April of 1989, looking like she'd finally gotten over the brutal treatment her show got from the critics, and then the cancellation of the show. Well, I hope you enjoyed looking at this little piece of TV history. Did you love Lucy? Had you seen her 1986 comeback? Let me know your thoughts below, and hey, thanks for stopping by and watching.